Hello, my name is Carrie Smoke, and today I'm going to talk about the Cambrian Explosion. I am an apologetics lecturer and I have a master's science degree in public health. For more information on my background and who I am, please see my video called My Story. In this series, we have looked at the first two lessons, the Mars Hill approach and conditions for life on Earth, and today we'll talk about the Cambrian explosion. And you can see here the coming topics in the coming weeks: human evolution, transmutation, and the return of the God hypothesis. So let's look at the Cambrian explosion today. I will talk about in introduction Charles Darwin, Canada and China and findings there, the fossil record, evolution, the Bible, and then summarize what we talked about today. So first, let's introduce this topic by saying that the Mars Hill approach, which we talked about in the very first lesson, which is found in Acts chapter 17, verses 16 through 34, shows how Paul used unbelievers' own evidence. In verse 22, Paul perceived that the men of Athens were very religious. In verse 23, Paul used their idol to an unknown God to begin his talk about the one true God. And then Paul in verse 28, part B, quotes one of their own poets. It demonstrates that Paul understood the culture of the Athenians, those people living in Athens, Greece, and he was able to relate to their culture before talking about the God of the Bible. We will look at evidence from the Cambrian explosion and evaluate whether or not evolution or creation is a better explanation for the Cambrian explosion. What we see in the Cambrian explosion, what this picture is intended to show, is that fossils are relatively abundant in the Cambrian era and are very rare in the pre-Cambrian era. So why is it important to understand the Cambrian explosion? In the pre-Cambrian period, about 3.5 billion years ago, the fossil record only shows simple life forms. However, in the Cambrian explosion, suddenly there appears 20 phyla of fauna animals, and they're suddenly found very rapidly in the Cambrian period about 543 million years ago. In biology, a phylum is a level of classification below a kingdom and above the class. Here's a picture depicting that. You have the kingdom at the very top, which we have an example as animals, then phylum, then class, order, family, genus, and species. So phylum is a very high level classification scheme. In the Cambrian explosion, what we see is the first appearance of animals with eyes, ears, and digestive tracts. We also see every kind of skeleton known to have existed, past or present. So let's look at evidence from this Cambrian era and let it speak for itself. But first, let's talk a little bit about Charles Darwin. The first question that we're going to talk about today is, had enough fossils been discovered in the time of Darwin to make a definite conclusion about the sudden appearance of life in the Cambrian era? It really posed a dilemma for Charles Darwin when he looked at the Cambrian explosion. it did not meet his expectations of a more gradual introduction of phyla instead of phyla coming into existence very rapidly. Here's a quote from Charles Darwin on the origin of species on page 302. He says, "The abrupt manner in which whole groups of species suddenly appear in certain formations has been urged by several paleontologists, for instance by Agassiz, Bisset, and Sedgwick, as a fatal objection to the belief in the transmutation of species. If numerous species belonging to the same genera or family have really started into life all at once, the fact would be fatal to the theory of descent with slow modification through natural selection." Furthermore, Darwin states on page 308 of On the Origin of Species, "To the question why we do not find rich foliaceous deposits belonging to these assumed earliest periods prior to the Cambrian system, I can give no satisfactory answer. The case at the present must remain inexplicable and may be truly urged as a valid argument against the views entertained." So what Darwin is basically saying, the lack of transitional forms is a valid argument against his theory of evolution. Darwin's only explanation was that the fossil record was incomplete and that in the future transitional forms would be found. Alternatively, he proposed that transitional forms were not capable of being fossilized. Darwin then requested that Louis Agassiz, the leading expert on the Cambrian fossil record at the time that Darwin lived, to review his book on the origin of species. Agassiz said of Darwin's book, "Where are the fossilized remains? As a paleontologist, I have from the beginning stood aloof from this theory of the transmutation of species now so widely admitted by the scientific world. Its doctrines, in fact, contradict what the animal forms buried in the rocky strata of the earth tell us of their own introduction and succession on the surface of the globe. Let us therefore hear them, for after all, their testimony is that of the eyewitnesses and the actors in the scene." This comes from his book, Evolution and Permanence of Type, 1874, page 10. Interestingly, Agassiz took Darwin's request so seriously that he, at his own expense, went to the Galapagos Islands and observed what Darwin observed, and then wrote his book here and says what he says, that the doctrine or the idea of transmutation of species is not actually verified by the fossil record, by what Darwin observed. So he disagreed. And again, the Cambrian fossil record was the expertise. Louis Agassiz was the leading expert at the time. So Darwin actually rejected what Agassiz said. And the only reason he rejected it because Louis Agassiz was a Christian. He rejected outright what Agassiz wrote. So let's look at the evidence from Canada and China from this Cambrian period. The second question we'll deal with today is, what has changed in the approximately 150 years after Darwin's theory? So let's look at discoveries that have been made in Canada and China. In Canada, British Columbia, there is the Burgess Shale that was discovered by Charles Doolittle Walcott, director of the Smithsonian Institute, and he's discovered more varieties of Cambrian fossils in the early 1900s. In China, there's the Maotian Shale near the Xinjiang, southern China, and Professor J.Y. Chen discovered the best preserved examples of Cambrian fossils in the 1990s. Shale, by the way, is a type of rock formation. Here's the Burgess Shale in British Columbia in Canada. The third question we'll answer here today. Where are the transitional forms in the Precambrian fossil record? The Burgess Shale demonstrates the sudden quantum leap in complexity of life forms. Walcott, who investigated the Burgess Shale, predicted that Precambrian transitional forms would eventually be found in the seabed. However, offshore drilling in the 1940s and 60s uncovered samples from the seabed, and none of them contained Precambrian transitional forms that Walcott predicted. Question 4. Can soft-bodied life forms be fossilized? Next, evolutionists proposed that soft-bodied transitional forms could not be fossilized, that only hard-bodied animals would be capable of being fossilized. However, later excavations of the Burgess Shale documented soft-bodied representatives of several phyla. The existing Burgess collection represents approximately 70,000 specimens. Of these, about 95% are either soft-bodied or have thin skeleton. This is a quote from Simon Conway Morse in the year 2000. Let's look at the Maotian Shale in China, which you can see a picture of here. The discovery in southern China further confirmed that soft-bodied fossils from the Cambrian period can be preserved. Numerous soft tissues and organs such as eyes, intestines, stomachs, digestive glands, sensory organs, mouths, and nerves have been discovered in the Maotian Shale. Jellyfish have also been discovered here. Other fossils reveal the contents of the guts of several animals. Finally, sponge embryos have been discovered from the late Precambrian period in this era. Here are some examples of what we find at the Maotian Shale. You can see here clearly the gut of this animal. Here you can see limbs and other structures of this animal. And finally, this trilobite is well preserved. J.Y. Chen, who is the discoverer of the Maotian Shale in 2000, says, or this is a quote from the year 2000, "In China, we can criticize Darwin, but not the government. In America, you can criticize the government, but not Darwin." So what does the fossil record actually show us? Question number 5. What does the fossil evidence show? Does it support a top-down, diversity comes from an original form model, or a bottom-up model, amoeba to man? Some of you may be familiar with Haeckel's Tree of Life, which illustrates a bottom-up model, and I'll show you a picture in a minute. and the idea that complex life forms evolved from simple life forms. The Cambrian explosion, however, illustrates a top-down model. The top-down means the phyla came first and then diversity developed from the phyla. So here's a picture of Haeckel's tree. Of course, reading the details in this picture is hard, but at the very bottom you would have the idea of an amoeba, and as you go up the tree, you get more and more complex life forms. So that's the idea of amoeba to man in Haeckel's tree of life. What we actually see in the Cambrian explosion is a top-down model, the exact opposite of Haeckel's tree of life. If you look below the dotted line on this graph here, you'll see the actual fossil record versus the predicted evolutionary path. The predictive evolutionary path looks much like the tree of life that Haeckel proposed. But when we look for the actual fossils, what we find is that there is very little before the Cambrian era, and in other words, in the pre-Cambrian era, whilst when we look at the Cambrian era, we see several phyla, and you notice the straight lines here, not branching like the tree of life, showing a top-down model, the idea that the phyla came first and then diversity developed from the phylum. Can evolution explain the Cambrian explosion? Question 6. Can the body plans of organisms be rewired to create new species? Body plans are a set of morphological features common to many members of a phylum of animals. The vertebrates share one body plan, while invertebrates have many body plans. Charles Marshall, a Berkeley paleontologist, has proposed that body plans were able to be rewired in the Cambrian period to allow for rapid change in types of animals that we see in the Cambrian explosion. However, rewiring has never been observed. So why can't body plans be rewired? We're going to talk a minute about what are called the developmental gene regulatory network, or abbreviated as DGRNs. DGRNs control the timing and expression of genetic information during the development of an animal. DGRNs ensure that the developing organism produces the right proteins at the right time to service the right type of cells during the embryological development. In other words, it ensures that the heart is created at the right time, that lungs are created at the right time, and so on. Here's what the DGRN looks like. Of course, you can't see all the details, but you can look at this and see the similarity to an electrical schematic diagram. And so it's a very complex network of regulatory genes that control the embryogenesis period of an animal. So the complexity of DGRNs. Here's a quote by Eric Davidson in 2011. There is always an observable consequence of a DGRN subcircuit when it's interrupted. Since these consequences are always catastrophically bad, flexibility is minimal. And since the subcircuits are all interconnected, the whole network partakes of the quality that there is only one way for things to work, and indeed, the embryo of each species develops in only one way. Random mutations and natural selection, Darwinian evolution, has no effect on the DGRNs. There is no evidence that DGRNs can be rewired. Recall that Professor Marshall of Berkeley has proposed rewiring of DGRNs as a way to explain the Cambrian explosion. Let's look for a minute at the Bible and the Cambrian explosion. Question 7. Is the Bible consistent with the Cambrian explosion? Let's look at Genesis chapter 1, verses 11 and 21 in the English Standard Version. Verse 11 says, "And God said, Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which their seed, each according to its kind, on the earth. And it was so." This is day number 3 of creation. Verse 21 says, "So God created the great sea creatures and every living creature that moves, with which the waters swarm, according to their kinds, and every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." This is day number 5. And then we have Genesis chapter 1, verses 24 through 25. "And God said, Let the earth bring forth creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good." Day number 6. The use of the word kind in these verses is consistent with the Cambrian explosion. As we saw earlier, the fossil record is more like a lawn top down than a branching tree bottom up. So let's summarize what we have learned in this lesson. Why is the Cambrian explosion important? We see the first appearance of animals with eyes, ears, and digestive tracts in the Cambrian explosion. We also see every kind of skeleton known to have existed, past or present, in the Cambrian explosion. The animals from the Cambrian explosion appear suddenly in the fossil record. Let's review the questions that we have asked today. Number 1, had enough fossils been discovered in the time of Darwin to make a definite conclusion about the sudden appearance of life in the Cambrian era? The answer is yes. As we will see, the leading expert on the Cambrian era said that Darwin was wrong. That would be Louis Agassiz. Question number 2. What has changed in approximately 150 years after Darwin's theory? Answer: more fossils from the Cambrian and Precambrian era have been discovered, and there is even more evidence that Darwin was wrong. The third question: where are the transitional forms in the Precambrian fossil record? Answer: the findings from both the Burgess Shale and the Maya-Ocean Shale confirm a lack of fossils, transitional forms, from the Precambrian era, which is the opposite of what Darwin predicted. Question number 4. Can soft-bodied life forms be fossilized? Answer: yes. Fossil evidence from both the Burgess Shale and the Maya-Ocean Shale confirm that soft-bodied life forms can be fossilized. Question 5. What does the fossil record show? Does it support a top-down, diversity came from original life forms model or a bottom-up amoeba to man model? Answer: the actual fossil record supports a top-down lawn model, not a bottom-up tree model. Question 6. Can the body plans of organisms be rewired to create new species? Body plans are a set of morphological features common to many members of a phylum of animals. The vertebrates have one body plan, while invertebrates have many plans. The answer to question 6: the evidence shows that body plans cannot be rewired due to the developmental gene regulatory network. And finally, question 7: is the Bible consistent with the Cambrian explosion? Answer: yes. In Genesis 1, the word kind is consistent with the life forms in the Cambrian explosion appearing suddenly and with the top-down lawn model. So what conclusion can we make from the evidence? The evidence is consistent with God as the creator. Thank you for your attention today. Here are some references for further interest in study. Thank you again. Bye.